3 things went wrong before my son told me not to come for Christmas. First, the new dining table I'd helped him pick, the heavy walnut one that doesn't wobble if you lean, had a thin white scratch running down the middle, like a scar someone was too proud to sand. Second, the front window kept fogging from the kettle despite the vent fan, as if the house were holding its breath. And third, Isabel was laughing without sound, the kind of laugh you practice for photos. I noticed all of that before Michael cleared his throat. Brookhaven had settled into snow by the time I walked in. The neighborhood lights were already on, strings of warm gold looping across eaves. And the road out front had that hush you only get when you're one storm away from silence. I'd brought a loaf from Calhoun's bakery, the one with the sugared crust that crackles when you slice it. Isabel took it with a smile that slipped off her face and landed somewhere near the sink. I told myself she was tired from work. I told myself a lot of things in the 2 minutes before my son found his courage. We sat. Their house smells like cinnamon and pine around the holidays. Mine never did, not like that. Maria used to light a candle, something faint, lavender or lemon, and say, "Scent should be a whisper." She's been gone 5 winters. The quiet she left behind can still fill a room. "Dad," Michael began, and put his hand over his knife as if it might leap away. He's 37, with my height and his mother's patient eyes, and until that moment I thought I'd taught him what patience is for. I waited. I've learned that people tiptoe to their confessions. You only need to keep the door open. "We've been talking," he said. Isabel stared at the cranberries. Her voice was aimed at the bowl, "think it's best if you don't come this Christmas." The words fell straight down between the plates, no clatter, just the quiet shock of something breaking that never makes a sound. For a second I thought I'd misheard. The furnace kicked on. Outside, a car slid past with chains ticking. I saw my reflection in the fogged window, coat still on the chair, hair too long. A man who had learned the shape of usefulness and worn it like a coat he couldn't take off. "Best for who?" I asked. My voice came out fact-finding, the way it did at the shop when a rattling belt pretended to be a timing chain. "You always start with the easy questions." "For everyone," Michael said, too fast. "It's been a lot. The last few years. We thought maybe a quieter holiday this time. More, he gestured at Isabel, and the word wouldn't come. Space, I guessed. Control, if you asked his wife." "I see," I said. I didn't. Or I did, but not in a way a man wants to admit at his son's table. Isabel still wouldn't look at me. She'd grown her hair out. It fell over her left eye in a careful way, like she'd paid attention to how comfort looks in pictures. I remembered her at the courthouse, hands shaking as she signed her new name. I remembered the check I'd written for the photographer, because Michael had forgotten there was a second payment. I remembered the day the roofers ripped off the shingles, and I kept the coffee flowing like an air traffic controller, so the planes wouldn't crash. "Your parents," I said to Isabel, "are they coming up from Charleston?" A flicker then. "Yes." She tucked her hair behind her ear, blinked, and aimed for polite. "They're particular about traditions. It'll be a full house." "Full." I nodded. The word went around the room like a tour bus, pausing by every framed photo. Honeymoon beach, first house key, sonograms, and then pulled up short at the empty chair across from me where Maria would have sat. Full houses get crowded fast when you count the ghosts. Michael tried to smile. "We can do something in January. Or after. A dinner. Just us. January. After. I know those months. They live behind promises, blinking like porch lights you keep meaning to fix." I watched a bead of gravy slide toward his wrist and stop at the cuff. He wiped it with a napkin, careful, as if neatness could tidy the rest. I could have reminded them of numbers. I could have said, "Do you know how many lug nuts I've spun in my life? Do you know the sound alone makes when it leaves your account every month without missing a beat? 5 years times 2,700, the drumbeat inside a checkbook. But you don't drag the ledger to the table unless you mean to make a spectacle of the math. I've been many things. I haven't been a man who itemizes his love." "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," I said. It surprised me that I meant it. I looked at my hands, knuckles scarred, nails clean by effort, a line of grease that never goes away under the thumb. You didn't, Michael said too quickly, then slowed. It's not that, Dad. It's just a different season. We're trying to set our own rhythm. Our rhythm. I remembered the rhythm of late nights at the shop, the irregular heartbeat of a failing alternator, the springy clank of a lifted truck tied down for transport, the rhythm of a man counting other people's miles as if they were his own. Of course, I said. Every family needs its own rhythm. My chair scraped the floor as I stood. The sound made Isabel flinch, and then pretend she hadn't. I wanted to apologize for the noise, and then wondered when I began apologizing for occupying space. "Lenny pack you some leftovers," she said to the cranberries. "It's silly for you to go home and cook." "I'm all set." I slid my arms into my coat. It smelled faintly of oil and cold, the kind of cold that keeps a memory crisp. I should get back before the roads get worse. Michael rose with me. "Dad, wait." He reached for my shoulder and stopped halfway, hands suspended, as if the air had wires he might trip. "Don't be like this." "Like what?" I asked, standing. If I smiled, it was small. "I'm not angry." That part was true. Anger is hot and fast. What I felt was winter, steady, absolute, and coming on for a long time. I took the bakery loaf from the counter, held it a second, then left it where it was. The scratch down the dining table stared back at me, white in the warm light. No one mentioned it. Maybe they hadn't seen it. Maybe they had and decided someone else would fix it. At the door I paused, because leaving isn't art. Too quick and you look thin-skinned. Too slow and you look like a ghost. Isabel finally met my eyes. There was something there I couldn't read fully. Relief, maybe, or the satisfaction of a boundary enforced. She didn't owe me understanding. I didn't owe her a second plea. "Drive safe," Michael said. "I always do." It came out habit, like you too, when someone tells you to enjoy a movie you're not going to see. Outside, the porch boards creaked under my boots. I'd helped him repair the railing last spring. The screws were still holding, and some stubborn part of me admired that. Snow pressed its weight into the shrubs. The neighborhood was all glow and quiet, the sound of strings of bulbs humming faintly if you pretended hard enough. I walked to my truck, brushed off the windshield with the sleeve of my coat, and sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel, not starting the engine. I could have gone back in. I could have said, "Michael, let's not do this." I could have reminded him how December is bad for loneliness and worse for pride. Instead, I watched my breath cloud the cab and fade. When the defroster finally came warm, I eased into the street and took the long way home, past the park where we used to skate and the school where he forgot his lunch twice a week. The roads were firm under the snow, the kind you learn to trust by listening. Half a block down, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Their window was a rectangle of light in the dark, soft and domestic. It could have been anyone's house. It could have been mine if the world turned differently. The kettle must have started again, because the glass fogged, and then it cleared, and then it fogged again, like a lung working. I did not look back after that. I drove through the lights of Brookhaven, where every roof had a dusting of grace, and stopped at a red that seemed to take a little longer than usual. When it changed, I went. The town made room for me. The snow kept on falling, and the words my son had spoken fit somewhere inside me the way a key fits a lock, turning quietly, opening a door I didn't want to see behind yet. I reached for the radio and turned it off. The quiet felt honest. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I knew two things for certain. I wasn't angry, and I wasn't welcome. Those may be the same thing eventually, but tonight they were different. I carried that difference inside like a small, heavy package that didn't rattle anymore. I went inside, set my keys in the bowl, and stood in the kitchen for a while, listening to the heat tick through the vents. On the counter lay the list I'd written that morning. Filters to change, salt to buy, the new bulb for the porch. I picked it up, folded it in half, and slid it into the drawer. Then I turned off the light, and the house went to sleep around me. The engine grumbled when I turned the key, as if it, too, wanted to stay parked in the soft snow. For a moment I let it idle, headlights carving two dull cones through the flurries. The houses along Cedar Row shimmered with color, greens, reds, warm yellows. Each window a postcard of a life that didn't have room for me anymore. I reversed slowly, the tires crunching through the slush, and my reflection in the rearview mirror caught me by surprise. I looked older than I remembered, older than I'd felt walking into my son's house just an hour ago. Funny how disappointment can add a decade to your face. The road was quiet. Snow muffles the world in a way that makes you believe you're the last man driving it. I turned onto Brookhaven Avenue, the street Maria used to call our little runway. Every Christmas, we'd drive down this same route, she humming along with the carols, the heater blowing her hair across her face. "Home looks different when it's covered in light," she'd say. Now all I could see was the way Michael's dining table gleamed under the chandelier, the one I'd bought them as a housewarming gift. Every board of that table was paid for in overtime hours and skipped lunches. I could still smell the varnish, the faint mix of glue and polish. I remembered when it first arrived, how proud he'd been calling me to help assemble it, because Dad always knows how to fix things. That was 2 years ago. Now, I wasn't even invited to sit at it for Christmas dinner. The truck heater groaned, trying to keep up with the cold seeping through the glass. I turned it higher and kept driving. Brookhaven's Christmas lights blurred into long ribbons of color as I passed by. Every porch, every wreath, every snowman felt like a reminder of the warmth I'd been pushed out of. Maria would have told me to let it go. "People grow apart then," she'd say. "That's just life. You gave what you could." But what if you gave everything? 5 years. That's how long I'd been making those payments. $2, $700 a month for a mortgage that didn't have my name on it. Back when Michael first came to me, voice trembling over the phone, saying the bank wouldn't approve him without a guarantor. I'd said yes before he finished explaining. "You're my son," I told him. "We build things together." And I did. I built his house, his comfort, his future. My own retirement shrank to a number that looked smaller every time I checked. I remember eating canned soup 3 nights in a row once because the transfer cleared earlier than expected. Meanwhile, Michael and Isabel posted pictures from Barbados, smiling against sunsets I'd never see. She wore a gold bracelet I recognized, my late wife's, the one she'd left in a jewelry box marked for family. I said nothing. Back then, silence felt like grace. Now it felt like proof of my own stupidity. The truck skidded slightly near Pine Hollow Road. I steadied it, heart kicking once, then eased up on the gas. Snow swept across the windshield like sand in a storm. I should have been thinking about driving, but my mind kept replaying the look on Isabel's face at the table, polite, distant, and cold. She couldn't even meet my eyes when she told me to stay away. The same woman whose college tuition I paid when her father couldn't help out that semester. The same woman I walked down the aisle because her own dad showed up late. Somewhere between then and now, I had become an inconvenience, a relic that didn't match the furniture. The light turned red at Brookhaven Circle, and I stopped. My hands tightened on the wheel until the leather creaked. When did generosity turn into foolishness? I muttered. The dashboard clock blinked 9:17 p.m. The night was still young, but I felt finished. Maria's voice came back, gentle and clear as if she sat beside me. "Don't let bitterness set the table, Denver. It eats alone." I smiled bitterly. Too late for that, love. The radio flickered on, a news anchor talking about the upcoming snowstorm, maybe 10 inches by morning. I turned it off. The silence was heavier but cleaner. By the time I reached my driveway, the snow was thick enough to bury footprints. The porch light flickered weakly, half frozen in its socket. I'd meant to fix that last week, but I suppose it didn't matter anymore who saw the way home. I parked, engine rumbling low, then shut it off and listened as the ticking metal cooled into stillness. It's strange how a machine's silence can sound so final. Inside, the house greeted me with that faint smell of oil and pine cleaner. I dropped my keys into the bowl and sat at the kitchen table, the same one Maria and I had bought secondhand 30 years ago. Its edges were worn smooth, but it had never betrayed me. I took out the small notebook from the drawer. Old habit. Every payment I'd made for Michael's house was listed there in neat columns, dates, amounts, notes in the margins. Mortgage assistance, M. Rowan. The ink was faded on the first page, but bold on the last. 5 years of help. Over $160,000. I ran a finger down the page, the paper soft from use. I thought of every dollar as a promise. A promise that my son would build a life stronger than mine. Now those promises looked like debts I'd paid to be forgotten. Outside, wind brushed against the windows. Somewhere, a dog barked once, then fell quiet. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling until my eyes blurred. There was a crack in the paint near the light fixture, small but spreading. Something I'd meant to fix months ago. It looked a little wider now, like time itself was pulling the house apart. Maybe that's what happens when you give too much. You weaken your own beams, holding everyone else up. I got up and poured a glass of water. The tap sputtered, then ran clear. In the reflection of the kitchen window, I caught sight of myself again, shoulders stooped, eyes tired but sharp. You did what you thought was right, I said under my breath. They just forgot what right looked like. I finished the water, set the glass down, and turned off the kitchen light. The house sighed as the heat kicked in, a sound that almost felt like company. Upstairs, the framed photo of Maria watched from the mantel, her smile still soft, still forgiving. I wondered what she'd think of all this. Her son, our boy, asking me not to come for Christmas. Maybe she'd tell me to wait it out. Maybe she'd say he'll come around. I wasn't sure I believed that anymore. I went to the window and looked out. Across the street, the neighbors' lights twinkled in the snow. The whole town seemed wrapped in a comfort that had quietly shut its doors on me. I pulled the curtains closed and let the darkness have its way. When I finally sat on the edge of the bed, boots still on, the exhaustion hit like a weight. I thought of the road tomorrow, the endless white stretching out of town. Maybe I'd drive just to drive, no destination, no conversation waiting. Just the hum of the engine, steady and familiar. The one thing that never asked for more than I could give. And as I drifted into sleep, one thought stayed with me, steady as a heartbeat. You can't buy your way into someone's love. But you sure can pay for the privilege of learning that too late. By the next evening the snow had hardened to a brittle crust. I kept busy with needless chores, wiping a counter twice, tightening a hinge that didn't squeak, checking the salt though I knew it was fine. Around 6, a small pot of soup breathed on the stove. That's when the phone rang. Isabel's name lit the screen. I let it ring twice and answered on the third. Dennis, she said in the tone people use when kindness is a task. I wanted to clarify what happened last night. What happened, I said, was clear. A pause, delicate as crystal. It was a misunderstanding. My parents have certain traditions. They prefer intimate holidays. Private. It wasn't meant to hurt you. I watched fog bead on the kitchen window and run in slow lines. Private, I repeated. You understand, right? She continued before I could answer, arranging her words like flowers in a vase. Michael and I are setting boundaries. It's healthy. And, well, you're not really the festive type. Then the light laugh, meant to usher discomfort out of the room. You know what I mean. I pictured her at that neat counter, a bright glass in hand, talking as if language were a sport she played better than anyone else. I remembered the ring on her finger, paid for with hours that smelled like solvent and rubber. The soup clicked under the lid. Isabel, I said, I've seen enough holidays to know what they're like. I don't mean anything by it, she said, and managed to mean everything. This year is special. We've worked hard. The house, my promotion, my parents visiting. I needed to go smoothly. Without, she searched for a word innocent of accusation. Complications. I'm a complication, I supplied. That's not fair, she said quickly, softening her voice so the script could continue. You've been very generous. We appreciate it. But generosity doesn't obligate us to include you in every plan. You agree, don't you? I considered the pot, the slow lift of steam. Maria used to put her hand over mine and say, don't answer right away. Let their words run out of road. I waited. I think you and I measure appreciation differently, I said. She sighed, practiced pretty. I called because I respect you enough to explain. I didn't want awkwardness if we run into each other in town. You know how Brookhaven talks. I do, I said. The Chronicle once announced my retirement like a wedding. Local mechanic hangs up wrenches after 40 years. The clipping lives in a drawer, edges the color of tea. Good, she said. So we're on the same page. There it was, the transaction stamped paid. Habit reached for peace like a tool I could lay on the bench. I thought about the roof I arranged last summer, the wedding bills I covered, the transfers that left my account on the first of every month. I thought about how Michael had looked at me once, proud, and how that look thinned with time. Isabel, I said, I've got soup on. She laughed again, lighter still. Then I won't keep you. But she did. Explanations stacked on the counter of the conversation. Maturity, new traditions, her parents' expectations. She valued the stability I represented. She said, the way you praise a foundation before hiring someone else to design the house you want to be seen in. I set the phone on speaker and lifted the lid. Steam fogged my glasses. I wiped them on my sleeve. I thought of Maria at Christmas, hands moving with the quiet certainty of someone who could fix most things by making a plate and sitting you down. Some kindnesses, she once told me, are wasted on people who think they're entitled to it. I'd said that was harsh. She'd given me a half smile, half warning. You'll see, Den. On the phone, Isabel's voice ran like a smooth river. You understand, right? She asked again, as if it were a chorus. You won't make this difficult for Michael. I switched off the burner. The little light died, and the silence of the cooling element filled the room. I won't make anything harder than it already is, I said. Thank you, she replied, real relief in her tone. You're a good man. No, I said, surprising us both. I'm a man who tried to do good. Sometimes that looks the same until it doesn't. Another pause, just air losing its shine. Well, she said, I'm glad we spoke. The words tied a ribbon on a box that held nothing. Have a good evening. You too, I said, because muscle memory is honest when pride wants to improvise. I took the phone off speaker and brought it back to my ear. Isabel. Yes. Tell Michael I love him. Silence, like a room she didn't want to enter. I will, she said at last. I ended the call. The screen went black, and in it I saw my face again, older and steady and strangely unafraid. The kitchen sounded like it always does after something has been decided. The clock keeping time, the house settling, the weather talking against the siding. I ate standing up. The soup tasted fine, better even. When I finished, I washed the bowl and set it to dry. Then I opened the drawer where I keep things I can't throw out. The Chronicle clipping, a coaster from the bar, where Michael and I watched games, a winter photo of Maria in a knit hat. I laid them on the table and looked at them the way a foreman looks at a job site at dusk, counting what's left and what's worth saving. Some kindnesses are wasted, I said, and the house didn't argue. The phone lay face down, quiet as a stone. I slid it away and pulled my notebook close. Tomorrow, I would cancel the transfer. Tonight, I let the decision sit beside me like a calm dog, patient, certain, asking for nothing but the door in the morning. Outside, ice ticked on the window. Brookhaven's lights thinned to a patient glow. I turned off the switch and walked down the hall, feeling for the handrail in the dark the way you do in a familiar house when you finally remember it's yours. The next morning came gray and still, the kind of winter light that seems to forget what color is. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of black coffee, staring at my notebook. The pages lay open like a confession I'd read too many times. Each line was a memory disguised as arithmetic. January 2020, $2,700. Mortgage assistance, M. Rowan. February 2020, $2,700. Mortgage assistance, M. Rowan. And on and on. 5 years of payments. 60 transfers. $162,000. I traced a finger down the column and let the numbers talk for me. I could hear Maria's voice faintly, the way she used to say, "Don't count what you give, Denver. It ruins the giving." She was right, back when giving still felt like love. But love, I was learning, has a cost that doesn't always come with a receipt. I turned the page. The next section was labeled home repairs. I'd kept those too. New roof, $8,000. Wedding loan, $14,500. Kitchen renovation, $12,000. It read like a ledger from a life I no longer recognized. I could remember the day each amount left my account, the small sting in my chest when I clicked transfer. The way I always told myself it didn't matter, because Michael and Isabel were building something. Because that's what fathers do. They give, even when it's inconvenient, even when no one says thank you. But that night at their table, it had shown me exactly what I'd bought: distance. I stood up, walked to the sink, and rinsed out my coffee cup. The faucet hissed like a slow leak. My reflection in the window hovered faintly, tired eyes, a face that looked too old to still be waiting for approval. I went back to the table and picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over the banking app. I scrolled through the scheduled payments, and there it was. Mortgage assistance, M. Rowan, $2,700, recurring. It had been set to send automatically on the 1st of every month. I stared at it for a long time. Canceling it felt like cutting a cord that had long since stopped carrying power. I pressed cancel transfer. A small confirmation box appeared. Are you sure? I didn't hesitate. Yes. The button blinked, and then it was done. Just like that, 5 years of obligation ended with one quiet tap. For the first time in years, the silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt earned. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. The house creaked as if it approved. It wasn't anger that filled me. It was something calmer, sharper. A sense of finally setting down a weight I hadn't realized I'd been dragging. I opened the drawer beside me and took out a pen. On a clean page, I wrote, total given, $196,500. Total gratitude, 0. Then, beneath it, lesson, love isn't measured by what you spend, but you'll sure know its price when it's gone. I closed the notebook. Outside, the neighborhood was waking. The sound of a snowblower hummed faintly down the block. Somewhere, a child laughed, the sound bright against the still air. I should have felt bitter. Instead, I felt clear. I walked to the living room and looked at the photo of Michael as a boy, 7 years old, missing his front tooth, holding up a model car we'd built together. He'd painted it red, even though I told him the real one had been blue. Red's faster, he said, grinning wide. That kid had trusted me with everything. I wondered when that trust had gone missing. Maybe the day he stopped building things with me and started buying them instead. The phone buzzed on the table. I didn't check it right away. When I finally looked, it was an automated alert from the bank. Payment canceled, mortgage assistance. Confirmation number 4941. I smiled just a little. I walked to the coat rack, pulled on my heavy jacket, and stepped outside. The air bit at my cheeks. Across the street, the Carsons were stringing more lights onto their fence. The bulbs glowed like tiny embers against the snow. Maria would have liked this morning. She always said snow made the world honest, because it showed where every step went. I decided I'd go visit her grave later, bring fresh flowers. Not because it was the season for it, but because I needed to tell her what I'd finally done. I stopped, I'd say. I stopped trying to buy my place in their lives. Maybe she'd be proud. Maybe she'd just nod that quiet way she did, the one that said it took you long enough. Back inside, I poured myself another cup of coffee. It tasted different, less bitter, somehow. I looked at the canceled payment notice one more time and whispered, for the first time in years, this money stays with me. There was no applause, no vindication, just peace, steady and unfamiliar, but real. The old wall clock ticked in the background. I hadn't noticed it in weeks. Now, each click sounded like something mending. I sat down again, opened the notebook, and under my last note wrote 3 more words. I'm done paying. And for once, I wasn't talking about money. The next morning arrived quiet and colorless. Snow had stopped some time before dawn, leaving a stillness over Brookhaven that almost felt rehearsed. I stood at the window with a cup of coffee cooling in my hand, watching a delivery truck crawl down the street. The driver waved. I nodded back. It struck me that most human kindness now lived in gestures that meant nothing. I was halfway through a second cup when the phone rang. Isabel again. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity, or maybe a stubborn streak, got the better of me. Morning, I said, keeping my voice even. Her tone was different this time. Not soft, not sweet. Something clipped and managerial. "Dennis, could you do me a favor?" There it was. The word favor. I could almost hear Maria sigh. "What kind?" "My parents are flying in from Charleston this afternoon. Michael's got a meeting that ran late, and I'm swamped getting the house ready. I was hoping you could pick them up from the airport around 2. I leaned against the counter. "You mean the parents whose traditions don't include me?" A pause, short but sharp. "Dennis, please don't make this difficult. They'll expect someone waiting at the gate with a sign. The traffic's a nightmare around the holidays. I'd really appreciate it." Her voice had that tone people use when they've already decided you'll agree. It wasn't a request. It was a command wrapped in courtesy. "I see," I said slowly. "So they're flying in at 2? "Yes. You'll recognize them easily. First-class passengers, both in gray coats. My mother's hair is silver. She'll have a red scarf. Oh, and please don't park too far away. They can't walk long distances." "Of course," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Thank you." The words came out relieved, as if order had been restored. "You're a lifesaver." I didn't answer that. "Michael will text you their flight number just in case," she added. "I'll make sure they know to look for you." I told them you'd be happy to help. I let the silence linger long enough for her to sense it. "You told them I'd be happy?" "Yes," she said, missing or ignoring the edge in my tone. "You've always been reliable, Dennis. That's one of your best qualities." Reliable. The word tasted like rust. "Sure," I said quietly. "I'll take care of it." She exhaled audibly. "Wonderful. I knew I could count on you." The line went dead a moment later. I set the phone down and stared at it as if it might apologize. The clock on the wall read 9:47. I turned back to the window. Across the street, the Carsons were loading their kids into a minivan, laughing about something that didn't matter. The world looked perfectly ordinary, which made the decision forming in my mind feel even clearer. I walked to the table, picked up my old notebook, and flipped to the last page. The words from the night before stared back. "I'm done paying." I thought about Isabel's voice, smooth, certain, sure that I'd still bend to their needs even after being shut out. I thought about the way Michael hadn't called once since that dinner. The way they'd left my generosity running like a faucet they didn't know how to shut off. I smiled small and private. "You're right, Isabel," I murmured. "I'll take care of it." I closed the notebook and slid it into the drawer. Then I went about my morning as usual. Fixed a loose cabinet hinge. Salted the walkway. Made a sandwich for lunch. Around 1:30, I checked my phone. 3 new messages from Michael. Flight number, estimated arrival, a quick thanks, Dad. No apology. No acknowledgement of what had happened. Just thanks, Dad. As if the past week hadn't split us clean in 2. I sat at the table, the phone face up beside me. Outside, snow began to fall again, fine and slow. I watched it gather on the railing and didn't move. 2 o'clock passed. Then 3. By 4, the light outside had turned the color of pewter. I made myself another sandwich, this time with thick slices of ham. I turned on the radio, the soft hum of holiday music filled the room, and ate while the phone buzzed, once, twice, again. I didn't answer. Somewhere across town, Isabel's parents were standing at the Port Haven arrivals gate, clutching designer luggage, and waiting for a man who had finally learned how not to show up. When the sun went down, I turned off the radio and stood in the doorway for a while. The air outside smelled faintly of pine and car exhaust. I could almost imagine the scene unfolding miles away. Her parents red-faced, complaining to airport staff, trying to reach Isabel, while taxis honked in the chaos of evening traffic. I pictured Isabel's voice rising, sharp with embarrassment. Michael pacing behind her, jaw tight, wondering what he'd tell his in-laws, what he'd tell her, what he'd tell himself. And for the first time in years, I felt something that wasn't regret. It was peace, pure and steady, the kind that comes only after a long drought of self-respect. When the phone finally stopped ringing, I walked over, turned it face down, and went to wash the dishes. The sound of running water was the only noise in the house. I finished, dried my hands, and looked at the window again. The reflection staring back wasn't the same man who'd walked out of his son's house days ago. This one knew what lines were for, and how good it feels not to cross them. I poured myself a glass of water, raised it slightly toward the empty room, and said, "Here's to taking care of it." Then I turned off the lights, the world had moved on to a quiet dinner, except for the voices on my voicemail. The first came just after 3 o'clock. Isabel's voice, tight with disbelief. "Dennis, are you still on the way? My parents landed 20 minutes ago, and they haven't seen you. Call me, please." The second was sharper. "Dennis, what's going on?" "They're waiting at baggage claim. You said you'd take care of it." The third arrived at 4:30, brittle and cold as glass. "This isn't funny. They've been waiting over an hour. You can't just disappear like this." By the fifth message, the tone had shifted to fury, the kind that hides under politeness. "They had to take a taxi, Dennis." "A taxi? Do you know how humiliating that is for them? For us? We trusted you." I listened to each one while spreading butter on a slice of toast, letting her anger fill the kitchen the way winter wind fills an old barn. Loud, but harmless once you've learned where the cracks are. I didn't call back. Outside, the snow had turned to rain overnight, melting into rivulets that ran down the street like veins. My truck sat in the driveway, still dusted with frost. I'd slept well, better than I had in months. I poured another cup of coffee and sat by the window. The town felt quieter, somehow cleaner. Maybe it was me. Maybe when you stop saying yes out of habit, the world loses some of its noise. By sunset, I could imagine the scene at their house, the designer luggage rolling up the front steps, the glares exchanged, the accusations whispered in rooms filled with guests and expectation. I almost pitied them. Almost. The phone started buzzing again around 6. I let it vibrate against the wood until it stopped. Then came a text from Michael. "Dad, what the hell happened? Isabel's parents said you never showed. Call me." Another followed seconds later. "They're furious. You embarrassed us." I stared at the screen. For years, every message from him had begun with, "Hey, could you, or do you think you could help with?" Now it was just, "You embarrassed us." Not "How are you?" Not "Are you okay?" Us. Always us. I set the phone down and walked to the porch. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of thawing snow and pine needles. I sat in the old chair Maria used to favor in the evenings and listened to the faint hum of traffic in the distance. She would have shaken her head at me for what I'd done, but I liked to think she would have understood. Maria believed in kindness, but she also believed in limits. "Even a well will run dry if no one covers it back up," she used to say. I'd been the well too long. When night settled over Brookhaven, I made a simple dinner. Eggs, toast, black coffee again. The phone kept lighting up on the counter, flashing like a stubborn signal flare. I turned it over. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was earned. I thought of Isabel's parents sitting stiffly in the back of a taxi, their expensive coats creased, their irritation growing with every red light. I pictured a driver, indifferent, tapping the wheel while they complained about the rudeness of small-town people. By the time they arrived at Michael's, I imagined the storm brewing inside the house, voices raised, excuses made, someone trying to shift blame. I could almost hear it echo through the neighborhood if I tried hard enough. But not here. Here, my little home stayed quiet. The heater clicked on, the only sound in the room. After dinner, I took the notebook from the drawer again. No numbers this time. Just a single sentence written in the middle of a clean page. Peace costs nothing, but you have to pay for it once. I stared at those words for a long moment before closing the cover. Then I went to bed early, the faint sound of wind brushing against the window. Sleep came quickly, deep and dreamless. When I woke the next morning, the first thing I noticed was the calm. No guilt, no ache, just stillness. I made breakfast, fixed the loose hinge on the bathroom cabinet, even cleaned out the drawer full of junk mail. Each small act felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The phone stayed quiet until noon. Then came a new voicemail, Michael again, his tone low and controlled, the way you talk when you're holding anger by the throat. "Dad, I don't know what you were trying to prove, but you crossed a line. Isabel's parents are furious. They said it's the most humiliating experience they've ever had. I'm embarrassed, too. You made me look like an idiot. We'll talk later." The message ended with a heavy exhale. I played it twice not because I needed to hear it again, but because I wanted to be sure there was nothing else hiding between the words. No regret, no question, no trace of the boy I once knew. There wasn't. I deleted it. Then I opened the curtains. Sunlight cut through the room, bright and sudden. The storm had passed. The sky above Brookhaven was a pale blue, clear and vast, the kind that makes you think of new starts even when you're too old for them. I poured myself another cup of coffee and whispered to the empty room, "Looks like we're all learning about lines, aren't we?" And for the first time since that dinner table conversation, I smiled without bitterness. 2 days passed before I realized something had changed in town. It began at the gas station where the cashier, a young kid who used to greet me with a smile, barely made eye contact when he handed me my receipt. Then at the hardware store, old Carl Turner, who'd known me for 20 years, gave a cautious nod but didn't say a word. I thought little of it until that evening, when my neighbor, Helen Price, stopped by with her usual pie and a look that could melt varnish. "Dennis," she said, standing stiff in the doorway, "I read something today that can't be right." I raised an eyebrow. "Read where?" She held up a folded newspaper, the Brookhaven Chronicle, the same one that once printed my retirement story. I took it, unfolded it, and there it was. "Local man abandons elderly couple at airport." The headline was bold, the font cruelly large. Beneath it, a photo of Isabel's parents, Cody and Patricia Harland, standing near the Port Haven baggage claim, their luggage neatly stacked, expressions perfectly measured between dignity and injury. The article began, "A misunderstanding turned public embarrassment when longtime Brookhaven resident Dennis Rowan failed to collect his son's elderly in-laws from Port Haven Airport on Saturday afternoon." The Harlands, both respected figures in Charleston's real estate community, were left stranded for hours in freezing weather. I didn't need to finish. My eyes jumped to the line halfway down the page. Mr. Harland, a developer with deep ties to the Brookhaven business community, described the incident as callous and unbecoming. He expressed disappointment that a man so often praised for his reliability could act with such disregard for others. I read it twice before setting the paper down. Helen fidgeted with her gloves. "I told everyone it didn't sound like you, Dennis. But you know how people talk." "I do," I said quietly. "They talk louder when they're fed." She hesitated. "I just wanted you to know. I'll let you get back to your evening." "Thank you, Helen." After she left, I sat at the table with the paper still open. My hands were steady, but something inside me began to hum, a low vibration, the kind that comes right before a storm breaks. So this was it. Cody Harland, the man who'd never lifted a finger without expecting applause, had decided to turn a simple act of defiance into a public execution. The paper would have been all too happy to print it. Real estate money built half this town. I ran a finger along the column, tracing each lie like a scar. Elderly couple stranded. Callous behavior. Long-time recluse. They'd painted me into a villain, and not even a very interesting one. The phone rang again, Michael this time. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. "Dad," he started, his voice a mix of anger and exhaustion. "Did you see the paper?" "I did. Do you have any idea what this looks like?" Cody's furious. "Isabel hasn't stopped crying all day." "I'm sure she hasn't," I said. "Crying photographs well." "Dad, come on, this isn't funny. You've made me look bad. You've made all of us look bad. They said you just never showed." "That's true." "What?" "I never showed." He went silent. "You can't just, why would you do that?" I leaned back in my chair, letting his question hang. "Because sometimes not showing up says more than being there." He sighed, long and tired. "You can't fix things by making them worse." "I'm not trying to fix things," I said. "I'm trying to stop pretending they're not broken." He didn't reply for several seconds. Then, softer, "You've changed." "Maybe I finally haven't." I hung up before he could say anything else. The house was quiet again. I looked back at the paper and studied the photograph. Cody's polished shoes, Patricia's forced composure. Everything about it was curated for pity. They wanted the town to see me as heartless, a mechanic who'd lost his grip on decency. But pity I'd learned, was just another kind of control. I took a thumbtack from the drawer and pinned the newspaper to the wall above my desk. The sound of the tack piercing the plaster felt final, deliberate. I stood there, staring at it under the weak light of the desk lamp, and said softly, "You took everything, Cody. Let's see how much you can lose when truth shows up at your door." I didn't know exactly what that truth would look like yet, but I knew where to start. I walked over to the cabinet where I kept my files, the old man's kind of archive, full of bank receipts, home repair invoices, notarized documents. Years of proof that I wasn't the recluse they described. I ran my fingers across the folders until I found one labeled house payments. The edges were soft from years of handling. I laid it open on the table. Each document inside had its own story: loan transfers, home improvement receipts, even the email confirmation of Isabel's wedding photographer, the one I'd quietly covered when the bill came due. It was all there, paper proof of every kindness they'd ever mistaken for duty. The Chronicle could smear my name in print, but paper, real paper, had its own power. I stacked the documents neatly and slid them into a new folder. Across the top, in bold ink, I wrote one word: truth. Then I sat back, folded my hands, and let the room settle. Outside, the streetlights flickered to life. Snowflakes drifted under them, catching gold in their fall. Brookhaven was small, but news traveled fast here, rumor faster still. By morning, the whole town would think I'd abandoned a helpless couple in the cold. Let them. The truth has a way of arriving late, but it always arrives. And when it doesn't knock. I woke before dawn with the feeling of a wrench in my hand. In the half-dark, the room still smelled faintly of machine oil and winter, and for once both were comforting. Snow pressed softly at the window. I lay there a moment, letting the plan assemble itself the way an engine diagram resolves when you stop forcing it and just look. When the coffee finished, I sat at the kitchen table and pulled the box of papers close. The folder I'd labeled truth lay on top, neat as a new gasket. I opened it and began sorting. Years of bank statements, every transfer to Michael's mortgage, each line an umbilical I'd finally cut. Receipts from the roofers, the kitchen renovation, the wedding loan. A printout of a mortgage contract where I'd signed as guarantor, black ink steady, as if I'd known what it would cost, and said yes anyway. Behind those, screen captures from Isabel's social pages. Brags dressed as gratitude. Vacations with... I set up 3 stacks. Proof, timeline, audience. Proof explained itself. Timeline would turn years into a story someone could follow between bites of roast beef. Audience was trickier. I wrote 3 names on a yellow pad. Guests, Chronicle, Michael, and underlined each. What I planned wasn't revenge. It was calibration. You don't tune a carburetor by shouting. You turn the screw a quarter turn and watch what the engine tells you. By 8, I'd driven to the library's public computers and printed copies. Printers are honest. They only do what you tell them. I hole-punched the statements and slid them into a simple binder. No fireworks, just pages. On the cover I wrote, Mortgage Assistance, 2020 to 2024. Below it, in smaller letters, prepared by D. Rowan. People take care with anything that looks official. I'd learned that from 40 years of service invoices. At the UPS store, I made duplicates. One for me, one for the Chronicle editor, and a set of select pages for the party. The clerk asked if I wanted them bound. Staple is fine, I said. Truth shouldn't look expensive. He laughed without knowing why. Back home, I laid everything out on the dining table that had listened to Maria's hands for 3 decades. The sun had burned a narrow path through the cloud cover. It fell across the desk like a ruler. I arranged the pieces along that beam the way she used to line up ingredients before cooking. Nothing fancy, nothing missing. Then came the letter. I took my time with it. To the friends and colleagues of the Harlan family, I wrote in black pen, printing clean and slow. My name is Dennis Rowan. I'm the retiree in this week's Chronicle article. I kept going. Not pleading, not accusing, just putting numbers next to choices and dates next to headlines. I ended with a line I like for its simplicity. Reliability looks a lot like generosity. When you never check, who keeps paying? In the garage, I opened an old toolbox and found the envelope of Polaroids from the roof job. Me in a harness on Michael's house, a coil of shingles at my feet, the sky an innocent blue. I slid 2 of those into the binder's pocket for texture. People forget the human scale of invoices. A photograph recalibrates the eye. Lunch was a peanut butter sandwich eaten over the sink. Nerves hum in a different register as you age. They're quieter, less dramatic, but they hold. I practiced saying only what needed saying and stopping when the room wanted noise. If Cody shouted, I would not match him. If Isabel cried, I would not fill the silence. If Michael tried to broker peace, I would ask him to read the dates aloud. Mid-afternoon, I called Helen across the street. You busy Christmas Eve? I asked. Only with whatever you're about to tell me, she said. I might need a witness. Not the legal kind, the human kind. Someone who can say what happened if the town tries to forget. I can do that, she said. And I can drive if you want your hands free. I'll drive, I told her. But thank you. Before dusk, I packed a simple bag, binder, spare copies, newspaper clipping, a pen, nothing else. The wool coat went on the chair back, the old hat in the sleeve. I checked the porch bulb, a small, stubborn ritual, and tightened the fixture a quarter turn until the flicker disappeared. Funny what steadies you. I looked at Maria's photo and spoke to her like a man checking torque. I'm not going to hurt them, I said. I'm going to stop letting them hurt me. The town slipped toward evening. Every window, a small theater of warmth. Somewhere, a choir practiced. Somewhere, someone burned a pie and laughed. I sat at the table with the folder and read everything one more time, tracing the lines not for mistakes, but for courage. The Chronicle headline on my wall had yellowed slightly at the corners. I smoothed it with my palm and left it there. Some lies are useful. They marked the path to the truth they thought they could replace. Before bed, I wrote a final card and paper-clipped it to the front of the party packet, for distribution after the toast. I pictured the moment, glasses raised, cameras ready, the performance of goodness at its fullest gloss. That's when clarity travels fastest. Not to shame them, though shame would come. To invite every guest into the adulthood of facts. I set an alarm, turned off the lights, and stood a long time in the quiet that followed, the house breathing slow around me. I had no appetite for drama. I had paperwork and intention. Tomorrow, Christmas Eve, I would walk up the Harlan's bright driveway with both, and leave with my name back in my own hands. Snow kept its promise all day, a steady sift that made the neighborhood look forgiven. By dusk, I tied the binder with twine and buttoned my wool coat. Helen lifted a mitten from her porch. I tipped my hat and walked toward the glow at the top of the hill. The Harlan's place looked like a hotel pretending to be a home. Cars lined the curb. A valet in a red scarf nodded as I passed. Each time the door opened, music and laughter spilled out, calibrated cheer. Inside, heat and light stacked themselves in layers. The tree looked engineered. The kitchen island was a runway of silver trays. I stood long enough for the room to notice me. Conversation thinned. Isabel turned first. For a heartbeat, her face was naked. Then it arranged itself. Dennis, she said, as if surprised by a power outage. We weren't expecting. I was invited years ago, I said. I'm honoring an old tradition. Michael's jaw ticked. Cody drifted from a knot of guests, smile engineered for cameras. Mr. Rowan, he boomed. A misunderstanding at the airport. Unfortunate. I set the binder on the marble like a newborn. Good evening. I brought something for after the toast. Isabel reached as if it were a stain. I kept my palm flat on the cover. To the friends and colleagues of the Harlan family, I said, voice just high enough to reach the far corners. My name is Dennis Rowan. You may have read the Chronicle. A ripple. The paper lay open under a basket of rolls. Tonight's centerpiece, no accident. I untied the twine and slid out the packet labeled Mortgage Assistance, 2020 to 2024. For 5 years, I said, I paid $2,700 on the first of each month. I guaranteed the mortgage. I paid for the roof. I loaned for the wedding. I set the stack by the wine. You don't need my adjectives. You need the dates. Cody laughed with too much teeth. Sir, this is a family celebration. Then consider this a family correction. I placed 2 Polaroids on the counter, me harnessed on Michael's roof, summer sky behind. Plastic clicked on stone. When your paper said I abandoned an elderly couple, it left out context. I didn't forget. I declined. The word dropped like a wrench. Michael's voice went young. Dad, please. You texted, we trusted you, I said. Trust means telling the truth about what you're standing on. I turned to the guests, whose attention had sharpened from curiosity into the fine point of gossip turning into history. Some of you invest with Mr. Harland. You should know what he calls reliability when it's someone else's money. Color moved under Cody's, tan like a fish under ice. Leave now, he said, quiet enough for the nearest circle. Or I'll have you escorted. That makes a different headline, I said. But it's your house. Isabel's eyes shone. You're humiliating us, she whispered. No, I said softly. I'm returning what you gave me. Your paper chose its words. These pages choose mine. I slid the Chronicle clipping across the marble, the headline bright as fresh paint. A councilwoman I recognized from yard signs lifted the top sheet. These are bank statements. She looked at Michael. Routing numbers, transfers, his account to your lender. It's not that simple, he said, which is what people say when it is. Around us, conversation restarted in low, urgent tones. A man in a navy suit, an investor by the watch, read with his lips, then pressed them into a line. The party had turned into minutes. Cody tried a different gear. You want money back? Is that it? A check would fix your pride. I canceled the transfer, I said. That was for me. This is for them, the record you care about more than your books. He looked past me for an ally and found none. Make him leave, he told Isabel. She didn't move. In her shoulders, I saw a life hit black ice. Michael took a step toward me, hands empty. Dad, he said, almost a plea. Don't do this. I already did, I answered. For 5 years. I tapped the stack. Tonight the math speaks out loud. The councilwoman cleared her throat. Mr. Harland, did you know about these payments? Our children's finances are their own, he said smoothly, which answered nothing. I closed the binder. Consider the mortgage my final gift, I told Michael. Keep the house if you can hold it. Keep your traditions if they bear weight. But don't keep writing me as the villain because I learned how to say no. Cody's jaw bunched like rope under load. If you walk out that door, he said, you don't come back. I smiled, small and tired. That's the first honest invitation I've gotten from this house. Several guests didn't pretend not to laugh. Isabel flinched as if sound itself had betrayed her. I lifted my hat. Read the dates, I said to the room. They tell the whole story. I turned and crossed the foyer. No one blocked me. At the door I paused long enough to fix the image in my mind. Documents on marble. Headline glaring beside them. My son's face a storm he didn't yet have language for. Outside the cold hit clean as a truth. The hill was slick. The town below lay simple again. Roofs capped and quiet. Behind me, voices rose and split. The sound of a machine coming apart along its weak bolts. The valet watched me from the drive. Respect unbought in his eyes. I tucked my hands into my pockets and walked down toward the ordinary dark, leaving their lights to burn as long as they could without catching fire. Winter took its time leaving Brookhaven, as if reluctant to let the cold story end. Snow melted slow, turning gutters into small rivers and driveways into mirrors of light. I spent most days in the garage, tuning engines for neighbors who still trusted my hands more than the new shop in town. It was quiet work, and that was fine. Quiet had earned its place here. 3 months passed before I saw Michael again. By then, the Chronicle had stopped calling me a recluse and started calling Cody Harland's foreclosure an unfortunate turn of events. His business empire had collapsed faster than anyone thought possible. The contracts he'd built on borrowed money, on my guaranteed mortgage, had finally buckled. The papers wrote it like weather, inevitable, given the pressure system. I didn't clip those articles. I didn't need to. Some truths don't need framing. They just settle into the air like the scent of rain after metal burns. That afternoon, I was fixing Helen's lawnmower in the drive when an old sedan pulled up to the curb. Michael stepped out. He looked smaller, not in height, but in weight, like life had scraped something off him. The suit jacket hung loose, the tie was gone. He carried nothing but a folded envelope, and the same look he wore the day he graduated high school, trying to act brave through confusion. "Hey, Dad." His voice cracked halfway. "Hey," I said. I didn't stand. I let the socket wrench rest against the metal. "You find the place all right?" He smiled barely. "Didn't think you moved." "Didn't have reason to." He nodded, gaze falling to the gravel. "You heard about the house?" "I read enough," I said. "It's gone. Foreclosed last week." His breath fogged in the mild air. Cody's name was on most of the paperwork. When the market turned and his company tanked, we couldn't keep up. I wiped my hands with a rag and leaned on the mower handle. "So it caught up to him." "And to us," he said quietly. "Isabel's gone back to Charleston. Said she needed to reconsider her future." "I guess that doesn't include me." I waited, but he wasn't finished. He looked up, eyes red from exhaustion. "Dad, I was wrong. About all of it. You were trying to help, and I let her make me think you were the problem. I lost everything." I let the words hang there. Birds were starting up in the trees again. Late robins testing the season. "No, son," I said at last. "You didn't lose it. You traded it." He blinked. "For what?" "For comfort. For approval. For an easier lie. People always trade slow things for shiny ones." He nodded, taking it like a verdict he'd already written in his head. "I deserve that." "I'm not giving you punishment, Michael," I said, setting the rag aside. "I'm giving you understanding. Punishment's when you keep repeating a mistake. Understanding is when you stop." He laughed softly, broken but real. "You always had a line for everything." I had time to practice. He looked around, as if seeing the house for the first time since he was a boy. The porch light glowed steady. I'd fixed it again in February, the same night I canceled the last of my automatic bills. "You still working on other people's machines?" he asked. "Some. Keeps me busy." "I could help," he said. "If you'll let me." It wasn't an apology. It was something better. A start. I nodded toward the open toolbox. "Grab that wrench, then." He hesitated only a second before crouching beside me. We worked in silence, the good kind, the kind that hums with memory rather than regret. The mower's engine sputtered once, then caught. He grinned despite himself. The same grin I remembered from when he first learned to ride a bike. When the job was done, he handed me the wrench. "You really forgave me?" "I did months ago," I said. "But forgiveness doesn't rebuild what greed destroyed. That part's on you." He nodded, pocketing his hands like a man who finally understood what empty felt like. "I'll rebuild," he said. "I believe that." We stood there for a while, two men and the smell of oil and grass, neither speaking. Finally, he turned toward his car. "Thanks for letting me stop by." "You don't need permission for that," I said. "You just need honesty when you do." He smiled once more, small but true, and drove off into the fading light. When the sound of his engine disappeared, I sat on the porch steps and looked out at Brookhaven. Spring had settled gently, lawns waking, windows open, laughter returning to streets that had been silent too long. The world hadn't changed much, but I had. The bitterness was gone, replaced by something steadier. Not happiness, something closer to peace. I looked up at the porch light. It flickered once, then glowed strong again. I smiled at that, the way small things keep their promise when people don't. Maria would have liked that. I took a deep breath of clean air, the kind that smells like new beginnings, and whispered to her, to the empty sky, to whoever listens when no one else is around. "It's over, love. Finally over."